Hello everyone and welcome to this episode of The Railway Tales. When people think of Britain's coal railways, they usually picture the great mining regions of Yorkshire, South Wales and the North East. But hidden away in the countryside of Kent is a remarkable railway network built for a coalfield that many people didn't even know existed. Today we're exploring the fascinating story of the East Kent Coal Railways, the lines that served the Kent coalfields and helped transport millions of tons of coal from beneath the Kent countryside.
Chugging down the tracks, the whistle blows. Every mile a story, every stop a glow. From steam to diesel, the rails unwind. Railway tales take you on a ride through time. Hear the rhythm of the wheels, feel the heart of the rails. Stories unfold like tracks on endless trails. Through mountains, towns, and open plains. Come aboard, the journey remains. Railway tales, where the stories never end. On iron horses, with every bend. From sunrise rides to moonlit trails. Hop on board, it's Railway Tales.
The story begins in 1890, while engineers were carrying out investigation linked to the early Channel Tunnel proposals. They discovered something unexpected beneath Kent's famous chalk hills. They found coal. This discovery led to the development of the Kent coalfield, with collieries being planned across eastern Kent. However, there was one major problem. Most of these new mines were located in rural areas with poor transport links. Moving heavy machinery into the pits and transporting coal out to customers would require a railway. The task of building the railway fell largely to the famous light railway engineer Colonel Holman Fred Stevens. Known for constructing economical railways on tight budgets, Stevenson designed what became the East Kent Light Railway. Construction began in the early 20th century and the first sections opened from 1911 onwards. Unlike major main lines, the East Kent Railway was built cheaply. Second-hand materials were often used, stations were basic, and the route followed a practical rather than luxurious approach. The railway existed for one purpose above all else: serving the local coal industry. The railway expanded into a network of branches and sidings, reaching several collieries across East Kent. One of the most important was the Tilmanstone Quarry. Connected to the railway in 1915, Tilmanstone became one of the most successful mines in Kent and generated the traffic that would keep the railway alive for decades. Other mines including the Snowdown Colliery, where coal production began in 1912 after difficult construction work that included flooding and a tragic accident during the shaft sinking. Coal trains became a common sight across the Kent countryside. Locomotives hauled wagons loaded with coal from the pits to connections with the National Rail Network, allowing Kent coal to reach industries and homes across southern England. Although coal traffic was its primary purpose, the railway also carried passengers. Workers travelled to the collieries, while local residents used the trains to reach the nearby villages and towns. The railway transported parcels, livestock, farm produce and general goods, becoming an important part of daily life in East Kent. Yet passenger numbers were never practically high. The line's future depended on coal. After the Second World War, the railway faced increasing challenges. Passenger services ended in 1948 following the nationalisation of British Railways. Freight traffic gradually declined as sectors of the network closed throughout the late 1940s and 1950s. By the late 20th century, only the sections serving Tilmerstone Quarry remained active. When coal production at Tilmerstone ceased during the 1980s, the railway's industrial role effectively came to an end. The final operational remnants of the network closed in 1986. The age of Kent's coal railway was sadly over. Now we're going to have a brief look at the locomotives of the then East Kent Railway. So firstly we have locomotive number 1. Now number 1 is an 060 GWR saddle tank locomotive. Originally built in 1875 by Fox Walker and Co. This saddle tank locomotive originally started life working over in Bristol before being moved around the country to various locations, including the Weymouth Harbour Railway. It came to the East Kent Railway after Colonel Stevens used a similar locomotive to build the Kent and East Sussex Railway to construct the East Kent Railway. Now, this locomotive predominantly worked at the Tilmerstone Quarry after construction of the line, and from what I can research, this locomotive survived up until September of 1935, when it is reported in a Southern Railway magazine that old number 1 has been broken up. Now the East Kent Railway locomotive number 2 is called Walton Park number 2. This locomotive was built by Hudswell Clark, works number 823. However, this locomotive came from another railway being built around 1908 and came from the Western Clevedon and Portishead Railway. The locomotive itself worked in Tilmerstone Quarry and along the line, occasionally hauling passenger services, and was reported to have been pulled back into service after a brief time out of service during the early parts of the Second World War, covering for another locomotive, number 4, which had failed. Locomotive number 2 was written down in the locomotive ledger to have stopped working in 1944. However, there are some reports on this locomotive being sold in 1943 to T.W. Ward and Co. as scrap. Now, unsure whether this locomotive was fully scrapped or just moved to a different railway afterwards, so we will try and look into this locomotive a little bit more and do another video on the locomotive itself. Now, from research, there was supposed to be 2 more Hawthorne Leslie 060 tank locomotive supplied to the railway. But sadly, the railway, not having enough funds available, was not able to purchase these locomotives. Instead, they purchased locomotive number 3, which was not new when it came to the railway, being a Victorian relic. However, it was the only remaining unrebuilt example of an Ilfracombe goods locomotive. Now, Stevenson apparently was very fond of this locomotive, and when it was withdrawn in December of 1913 from the London South Western Railway, it was purchased and brought to the East Kent Railway in 1916. It was a good passenger locomotive and was on regular passenger service whilst it was on the East Kent Railway. Sadly, because of this locomotive's age, it did not survive long on the East Kent Railway. At the end of the 1930s, she is reported to be withdrawn from service and outside the shed at Shepherdswell. And in 1934, she was sold for scrap for £45 at the time for the locomotive. Now, I am fully aware that Stephenson loved the Ilfracombe goods locomotives because on these other railway, the Kent and East Sussex Railway, he had another locomotive of this type called Rovenden, which we will do in another video. Now we're going to look at the East Kent Railway number 4. This little hefty tank engine came from Richborough in October of 1919 to replace another locomotive on loan to the railway. The locomotive itself is a Kerr Stewart 060 locomotive named Victory. This locomotive is one of a batch of 10 locomotives that were built by Kerr Stewart. Originally working for the Waterways and Docklands Department of the Royal Engineers, she was then brought to the East Kent Railway. Whilst her time on the East Kent Railway was rather long, she was the favourite of the locomotive department on the East Kent Railway then. She was regularly used on heavy goods trains up and down the line. Now, there are reports of this locomotive being rebuilt by the Southern Railway in late 1932, and then she re-entered traffic in June of 1933. She was out of traffic for a while, however, she kept shunting coal at the Tilmonstone Quarry and became part of British Railway stock in 1948. However, sadly, British Railways in the southern region had no time for this locomotive and she was sadly scrapped in 1949 before she could be given her British Railway number, which was going to be 30948. Sadly, she was the first of her class to also be scrapped. The next locomotive, East Kent Railway locomotive number 5, is a very odd choice for this rural light railway. An Adams radial locomotive number 0488, built for the London South Western Railway, came onto the East Kent Railway in April of 1919. Now, because of her axle load, she was too heavy to go on beyond the Tilmonstone Colliery. So, during her time on the East Kent Railway, she fluttered between the odd passenger turn and, of course, working the shuttle services alongside number 4 due to her tractive effort being strong enough to pull the trains down the line. She normally pulled around 14 coal wagons on her trip, whereas number 4 could take 18, so not too far off. She was last used on the East Kent Railway on the 29th of May in 1943. However, the Southern Railway purchased the locomotive for then £120 for the Lyme Regis branch, where 2 of her sisters had kept services going for over 20 years on that branch line. After an extensive overhaul, she went into service there until 1960. Now, all was not lost for this engine, and we have a very happy story for this locomotive. The locomotive itself was purchased in July of 1961 by the Bluebell Railway Society and has been used on the line previously up until 1990 when she was retired. She has worn different numbers over the time, and the last one being, of course, her London South West livery, number 488. The locomotive is now on static display in the Bluebell Railway sheds and can be seen by visitors on a regular basis. The East Kent Railway's number 7 locomotive was a Beatty saddle tank built in 1882 by Bayer Peacock and was a very similar design to the Ilfracombe goods locomotive, although the Ilfracombe goods is a tender locomotive and this is a tank locomotive. Now, the locomotive itself arrived on the railway around 1926 and continued to work until, sadly, being scrapped in 1946 at the Ashford Works. Now, there are some other locomotives that made an appearance on the East Kent Railway. There are a couple of O1 class 060 locomotives that worked on the East Kent Railway between 1950 and 1960. They were numbers number 31258 and 31434, serving Shepherdswell to Tilmanstone Quarry traffic when needed. Another locomotive was the C-Class South Eastern Chatham Railway locomotive number 100, also known as East Kent Railway number 2. This locomotive would frequently work up and down the line, stopping at all the collieries and, of course, the passenger stations along the line. And of course, in the early BR days, around the 1980s, the Tilmanstone Quarry also had a Class 08 diesel shunter. However, I'm unable to find out the running number of this locomotive, but these were used predominantly for shunting at the quarry until its final days. And finally, we're going to talk about a locomotive that's still on the site at Shepherdswell. Avonside 060 locomotive St Dunster was built in 1927 to works number 2004. This locomotive worked at the Snowdown Quarry up the road and was used until the end of steam on the line. This locomotive was withdrawn and moved to a place called Sellinge just before being purchased by the East Kent Railway in 1992. And you can see this locomotive at the East Kent Railway today, and we'll get onto that next. As I just said, fortunately, the story doesn't end there. In 1987, preservationists stepped in to save part of the route. Their efforts created today's East Kent Railway Heritage Line, based at Shepherdswell and running through the countryside once served by the coal trains. Visitors can still travel through the Golgotha Tunnel, seeing surviving railway infrastructure and experience a small but important part of Kent's industrial heritage. The railway stands as a reminder of a time when the East Kent Railway was one of Britain's newest coal railways, and when trains carried black diamonds across the Garden of England. The East Kent coal railways may never have matched the scale of the great coal networks of northern Britain, but they were a unique story. A story of unexpected coal discoveries, ambitions, engineering, hard-working miners, and a wonderful community. And a railway built to serve the industry that transformed that part of Kent for nearly a century. Today, thanks to preservation, that story can still be experienced on the rails of the East Kent Railway. If you haven't seen my video already of the East Kent Railway visit I did recently, please click the link above and that will take you to my railway vlog on the East Kent Railway, a day where I spent on this line. Now, if you have enjoyed this journey into Kent's forgotten coal network, don't forget to like, subscribe and join us next time for another chapter in railway history. And thank you for watching.
Chugging down the tracks, the whistle blows. Every mile a story, every stop a glow. From steam